Hey guys, you're joining me in the UK in the one day of the year that it decides to snow. And now the sun is out blaring down on me, so all the light is bouncing back up in my face. So if it looks like I'm crying, I'm really not. I just cannot see a thing. What I want to do is show you a little trick as to how you can get higher resolution shots and potentially sharper looking shots using the kit you've already got. However, this isn't really the best environment to explain everything to you in detail. So let's use the magic of video editing, jump back inside while I talk you through it all, and then I will see you back here in just a minute. See you then. And as if by magic, we're back inside. I'm now warmed up, I've had a nice cup of tea. The snow's gone because it's a completely different day to when I shot the first bit, but shh. The quickest way to get an image with a higher resolution is to get a camera that has a higher resolution. What if you want a higher resolution than what your camera can give you? Well, this is where this technique comes in. But this technique can also be used to create a completely different perspective than what you would normally expect from your camera. So what exactly is this new technique, Dave? Well, I'm glad you asked. Basically, it's creating a panoramic of images. So Lightroom, Photoshop have panoramic tools built in. There's a ton of free software out there that allows you to stitch multiple images together to create a wider image. And even smartphones have panoramic shooting modes where you pan the camera around and it basically stitches a series of pictures together to create a much bigger image. Now, most people would probably think use a panorama tool to create a panoramic shot, i.e. a photograph that's wider than the widest your lenses will let you see. But you can also use this panoramic technique to create an image that's the same size as the widest lens that you've got, but with a much higher clarity. Let me explain. So if I'm using this, say, a 5D Mark III with a 24-105L lens, if I take a picture at 24mm, then I'm going to see a 24mm field of view. But any objects that are far away from the camera are only going to cover 1 or 2 pixels, so probably won't have that much detail. If I zoom into 105mm, then all those little objects are going to appear a lot bigger, so are going to be a lot more detailed. But your angle of view gets narrowed down massively. So rather than take one image at 24mm, you could take a sequence of pictures at a longer focal length that cover that same area. So when you put them all together, you still see the same field of view that you see from 24mm, but you pick up the detail from having that longer focal length. This technique not only can potentially give you much higher detail, but can also force the perspective a lot more. So you'll know if you're taking a picture with a wide angle lens, even with a stupidly wide aperture, getting a very shallow depth of field is very difficult unless the subject's right up close to the camera. But getting a shallower depth of field with a longer focal length, like a 85-1.4 or something, is stupidly easy. Except you can't get much of your subject in unless you are standing 3/4 of a mile away. But you can use this same technique. You can take a sequence of pictures at 85mm at f1.4, so get a really shallow depth of field, but cover the area that you would normally see from like a 24mm lens. So you get an image that gives you the field of view of a 24mm, but the compression and look of an 85. I've used this technique in a couple of different times. So for example, this picture I took in Las Vegas. So anyone who knows or doesn't know Las Vegas, at the end of the Las Vegas Strip, you have a hotel called the Stratosphere, which is basically like a big observation deck that you can go up to. So that's where I went to take this image. So I took a picture at like 35mm and it was all right. But then this image was composed of about 100 images taken at 200mm. I've shrank the original file back down to like a 20 megapixel size, just to make it more manageable to work with, but even at the same resolution, the clarity that you get from it is better with a composition of telephoto pictures than a single wide angle. To demonstrate the forced perspective, this image is a composite of several images taken with a 70-200mm. It kind of throws you a little bit because you're looking at an image that gives you a wide angle field of view, but a telephoto level of compression. There's a few key things to remember as well using this technique. You can only really use this for environments where nothing's moving. So product photography is a good one for this, landscapes as long as there's not a lot of movement, or in certain situations as long as your subject's not moving. So for example, with the Jaguar shot, The Jaguar was lying completely still. The only thing that was moving was his head. So I made sure I got his head in a single image and then took the rest of the images around it and then just masked out what I didn't need later. So that's the theory behind it. Let's go back outside the other day and take some pictures. See you in a sec. So we're back outside, but the sun still hasn't moved. Who would have guessed? Now what I'm going to do is take a shot at 24mm just to show you what the normal scene you would get is, which looks a little something like this. I know it's not the best looking shot, you'll have to excuse that. I've walked literally around the corner from my house. There's an oil refinery the other side of those trees, which I can't do anything about. But really this is just to kind of show you the kind of level of extra detail that you can potentially get from using this trick. What I'm going to do now is go from 24mm all the way into 105. Now this is going to massively narrow the angle of view that I can see. So we're going to basically have to take a mosaic of images all the way across the scene to cover the same area that you normally would see at 24mm. Now, important things to remember when you are doing this. One, it's not going to work if you've got a lot of stuff moving around the scene because you're going to get overlaps and ghosting and all that sort of stuff. So static landscapes or product photography or stuff like that where nothing's moving, this technique really does work well. Number two, you have to remember to shoot in manual mode. No AV, no TV, no automatic. Because if you try shooting in an automatic mode, as you move the camera around the scene, it's going to meter the light differently for different parts that you're looking at, and the exposures aren't going to match up. So set it to manual, work out what your exposure needs to be and leave it there. And also turn off your autofocus. You don't want the camera to be changing focus points, so pre-focus on whatever your subject is. So in this case, it's going to be kind of a third of the way into the scene. I'm going to set the focus, leave it in manual, and then do not touch it. From there, all I want to be doing is just taking a shot, move the camera slightly, take another shot, move the camera, and repeat until I have covered the entire scene. But that's going to take me a bit of time, and obviously you don't want to sit there watching me do that, so let's speed things up a little bit. So that is it. Ow, that hurt. Time to get back inside, make some magic happen. See you there. Okay, so now you've got a ton of images. What did you do with them? Well, the specifics will kind of depend on what software you're using, but for argument's sake, let's look at Photoshop. So the first thing we're going to do is go up into File and then come down into Script, and we're going to click on Load Files into Stack. What this will let you do is bring multiple images into a single document. So once you've selected your images, you click OK, and then Photoshop will take a week and a half to bring all of these in. Once Photoshop's finished bringing all these in, we're going to need to select all of the images that we want to put into the composite, which is essentially going to be all the images. So if you come down to the bottom right corner here and select the top image, then hold Control and Shift and select the bottom image, that's going to select all of the images that are in the document. Then with the images selected, come up into Edit and click on Auto Align Layers. That's going to bring up a box that will ask you how you want to align the images. For now, just stick with Auto, and you can probably get away with ticking Vignette Removal and Geometric Distortion, as this is just going to help try and correct for the faults within the lens. Once you've done all that, click OK, and then Photoshop's going to spend the next 6 days trying to piece everything together. If you're using Lightroom, it's very similar principles, except you just select all of the images along the bottom that you want to have in the final shot. You right click, you go to Photo Merge, and then click on Panorama. Couple of things you'll notice. Firstly, especially if you're shooting with a lot of images, it's going to take your computer a long time to try and process all of this. Secondly, the longer the focal length is that you're using, the more likely that it is that the software is going to cause slight misalignments or misstitches. If you do get misalignment errors, they're usually quite small and fairly easy to just clone or airbrush out. The ideal setup really, in order to minimize the risk of having these misalignments, is to have a setup where the lens is pivoting on its parallax point. Now I know you're probably thinking, what the hell is a parallax point? But that's for another video. In the meantime, once you've got your finished output file, you can edit it exactly like a normal photograph. Except one, the file's going to be quite a lot bigger than any normal images you're used to editing. So you might want to scale down the image, particularly if you're on quite a slow computer. You may find the initial output file also has quite a lot of distortion to it, depending on how you've been shooting. If this is the case, you can use something like a warp tool to try and stretch the edges back into place, or you could try something like the automatic horizontal or vertical corrections that you find in Lightroom. But let's start to wrap things up and have a look at the finished result from the shots that I did earlier. So here is the original image that I took at 24mm. Now here's the composite of 105mm. Now I know the composite doesn't quite cover the same angle as a true 24mm lens, that's my bad. Now I've scaled down the composite image to the same horizontal resolution that the single 24mm image is set to. So if we zoom into 100%, you can see just how much more detail is being picked up in the trees. So there you have it. The panorama tool can be used not only for creating wider shots than you currently can, but also shots with more detail and shots with a completely different perspective than you can ever get with a normal camera lens. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the ideal way of shooting these sorts of shots is by using the lens's parallax point. Now, I am going to do a video on this. If the video is already online by the time you're watching it, click up here now. If there's nothing up there, you're just too quick for me, but stick around because it is on the way. So, thanks for stopping by, and I will see you in the next video.